If you came to visit us last year during the excavations, you would have seen us busily working away in this area. I'm back in the same space now, and you may notice things have changed quite a bit in this landscape. We have backfilled all of our trench from last year and built up this beautiful turf mound to mark out where the walls of our Mile Castle were. This is the eastern half of Mile Castle 46 that we excavated last year. Fortunately, none of the archaeology was in a state that we could consider leaving it exposed or consolidating it for the public to see, so we have reburied it and instated this turf mound to mark out where the Mile Castle was, put it back into the landscape. You can come up, you can climb on top of the mound like I am now, appreciate our really nice views out to the west all the way towards Bird Oswald and the Solway Firth, and really get a sense for what this landscape was like in the Roman period with this large imposing building right on the frontier at the edge of the empire. Spring 2024 excavation season started up here. While it may look rather unassuming at the moment because we have once again backfilled across our excavations, this was a really exciting area to start our second season in. We had the start of our many ditches, which have definitely been the theme of year 2 at Magna. We had a surprise sort of Roman military ditch just outside the Mile Castle, and then an even bigger surprise was we finally got a glimpse into this landscape in the pre-Roman period, where we had a nice Iron Age ditch curving through, marking out where previously there had been an Iron Age enclosure up on this hilltop. Again, it makes sense to take advantage of the beautiful views that we get from this site. If you're here in the Iron Age, you can farm the land and keep an eye out for any neighbours, any potential trouble coming your way. That was completely hidden under Roman cobbling that we had excavated the previous year, so definitely took us by surprise, but it's a really nice window to show that the Romans aren't the only people. That being said, we had plenty of Roman archaeology going on out here as well, mainly cobbles and road surfaces, so we were starting to find this really dense network of roads that we started to see from last year's excavation, with the road heading south from the Mile Castle back towards Magna Fort, but also the military way coming in along between the Vallum and Hadrian's Wall and forming junctions with all the different roads here, so as people could travel east, west, north and south from this part of the wall. We've now come a little bit further south from the Mile Castle, from the original trench that we started last year, into the new trench for this year's excavation, and getting ever closer towards the Vallum. But we're pausing up here because this was where we had our first really major surprise of the season. Back in May, we discovered a very unexpected cluster of cremation burials. There was a series of 4 just immediately beside me, another 3 a little bit further over, and then this large circular pit in front of me contained the remains of multiple individuals. We suspect that this is where they are tidying up effectively after the funeral ceremony. They have burnt their body on their pyre, collected all of the remains into a leather or cloth bag to be buried, and then any leftover ash and sometimes parts of the bones that have remained in the pyre site are getting raked up, collected together and then buried adjacent to the rest of the burials, so as they are still being treated with a level of respect as they go in the ground. This is a very unusual location to find burials. It's the first example, as far as we're aware, of burials on the north edge of the Vallum, right on the edge of its north mound as well. It took us completely by surprise, definitely not on the bingo card for 2024. As far as we're aware, all of the cemeteries associated with Magna should be much further south of this location. As you can see, it's all going on behind me here in the Vallum. This has been one of our big targets for this year's excavation, was to excavate a section across it. Sadly, the extremely wet spring and start of the summer that we've had this year has somewhat hampered our progress. You may be able to see part of the side has collapsed in with the water. This was flooded until very recently. We finally had a break in the weather, a few dry days, and we've been able to get in. The guys are throwing everything they've got at getting this lower and dropping down. The aim is to find the base of the Vallum to see the full profile of the shape of the cut, but we may have a way to go because we suspect that this should be 3 to 5 meters deep, so we're maybe approaching the halfway point right now. Here I am in the other of our massive ditches. This, when I said Magna 2024, the theme was big ditches. This and the Vallum is the main reason why. This ditch was a little bit more unexpected as opposed to the Vallum. Vallum is very well mapped. We know what it is, we know it's Roman. This ditch only recently became visible in the landscape as the peat bog that covers a large part of this field started to dry out and shrink. And so the dip in the grass line started to appear, showing that there was a ditch hiding under here that no one had ever mapped before or recorded before, which meant when we started this, we didn't even know if it was Roman. That was one of the main goals of digging this ditch, was to figure out what age it is. Very happy to report that we can now say it is definitely a Roman ditch. Very quickly, as we started excavating into this, we started to get Roman material culture, pottery, and other artifacts coming out very quickly as well. The reason it is so wet and the fill is so black all around me, it very quickly started to turn into anaerobic deposits, which is great for archaeologists. Does mean you definitely need your wellies to get in here, and it's very squelchy, but this is what the material that preserves all of our organic remains that Vindolanda and Magna are so well known for. So we have had 5 and a bit pieces of shoe, as well as other scrap leather, likely from tents. We've had a piece of worked antler that was part of a dice cup. We've had 3 big, long timber planks, very, very thin, that were likely used as shingles on the outside of a building, along with a lot of other building debris in the upper fills of this ditch, parts of walls and floors, which suggests that somewhere in the vicinity, during the final backfilling of this ditch, there was timber buildings that were being dismantled at the same time as this ditch was getting filled in, and they just threw all of the rubbish in here. The anaerobic is also really good for non-organic finds because it prevents corrosion on any metalwork. So one of our star finds from in here was 4 scales of Lorica squamata armour, or scale armour, still interlinked with their little hoops. And that was a very exciting day. Our volunteer that uncovered that, it was her dream find, top of the bucket list thing to find. So she was very excited about having found that. And it was a really nice example. You could still see the bronze colour coming through 2,000 years later, and really demonstrating the benefit of metal being buried in the anaerobic. In terms of what this is and why it's here, from the shape of the construction cut, we can see that it's a military ditch. This really, really steep south side to my left, and then a much shallower north side on my right, is pretty characteristic of a military ditch. So I stood here in the base of the ditch. I'm stood in a feature called an ankle breaker, which is what I'm slowly sinking down into under the water. My wellies are already getting quite stuck in the mud. And this is a common feature of Roman military ditches, to do what it says on the tin and break the ankles of anyone who tries to get across this ditch. If you come running down the north bank to try and give yourself some momentum to boost up the south side, you're probably not going to see this in the base. You're going to put a foot into it, put you off balance, and your ankles will go snap. And that is you pretty well incapacitated in the bottom of this massive ditch. The Roman soldiers can come along at their leisure and pick you off from up on the south bank inside their fort. We suspect that this is part of one of the earlier Magna forts. So our initial plan was to investigate those in years 4 and 5 of this project, when we're actually excavating inside the fort itself. But we've got this really nice early window into the fact that there may be much earlier, larger timber forts associated with Magna, stretching sort of almost double the length away from the current fort platform in the next field south of us. I have managed to free myself from the mud in the bottom of the ditch, as you can see. We've come up here onto the south bank of it, and where I'm stood we had another set of cremations, as well as, very excitingly, the pyre site. So where I'm stood here, there was a long oblong block of ash and burnt wood, all built up, no bone in it, just the burnt remains of the wood, and that represents the pyre where they were actually building up the wooden pile and putting the body on top to then set it alight and burn their dead. These are very unusual to find. A lot of cremation cemeteries, you only find the cremation burials themselves as opposed to the place where they are conducting the burning. So up here we have the full story of the cremations. We can go from the individuals bringing their dead here to burn them on the pyre, burying them, and then if we tie this in with the other cluster north of the vallum, we've got the tidy up pit where they're raking up all of the remnant ash and burying that as well. So we've got the full sequence of events across these 2 sites. Like I said, another cluster of cremations came out from around about me here. Another half a dozen or so were uncovered of the same type as the cremations north of the vallum. Small amounts parcelled up in leather or cloth bags and then buried in the ground, again suggesting that these people are also not part of the local community. They're not being buried in the main cemeteries to the south. They're not being given particularly lavish burial rites. People are doing what they can for them while they are far from home in one capacity or another. We're going to head away from our series of massive ditches and move on towards our second trench that we've opened up this year, much closer towards the museum, where we're excavating a well. We've now come south through the fields. We're a lot closer to our Roman Army Museum. You can see we are in full swing excavating this Roman well complex and mound that we could see poking out through the grass. This is week 1 of digging this trench. As you can see, the guys have made a whole lot of progress in just 1 week of digging. We've got a variety of different things going on here. We've got a lot of modern interference in the well from 19th and 20th century farming practices. Originally, the Roman Army Museum was a farm, and the farmers that were trying to make a living here, keep their animals, were making use of the fact that the well was a pre-existing water source, putting pipes into the side of it. There are pieces of Roman pottery coming out in association with the well. With the mound fabric, we've had pieces of brick and tile coming out of that, and around the back of the well, where the guys are working at the very back corner of the trench in the peat there, we've been starting to find really lovely pieces of Roman pottery, Samian and black burnished ware, which gives us a really secure date for the deposits below this well mound, meaning that we've got some really exciting archaeology to come here. If you want to come with me, we can go and have a look into the well and see how deep it is so far and how wet inside. This is the end of period 9 here at Magna. This team have made phenomenal progress across the site. We can say we have now finished that large southern ditch where I was sinking into the ankle breaker. We have opened up this site here at the well, started to confirm the age of some of the features around about here, and we are finally making progress in the vallum now that we've got a break from the weather and it isn't quite such a swimming pool for us to be working in. This project wouldn't be possible without the help of our very generous funders, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, as well as all of our volunteers. Tune back in towards the end of the season for a final update from here at Magna. I'm sure we'll have plenty to update you on across both the trenches that we've been looking at today.